Kamehameha V, Judiciary History Center. Co-hosting tonight's program with me is Ahukini Fuertes, the Center's Hawaiian Language Education Specialist. Before we begin, I want to thank Chief Justice Mark Rechtenwald and the Hawaii State Judiciary and Legislature for their continued support of our mission. Joining us to share their mana'o about Mele and Kānāwai are our distinguished guests, Haku Mele, Kili Kauilani Rivera, Frank Ka'io Kalani Damas, Jonah Kahonuola Solotorio, Nicholas Kelly Ilam, Uilani Tanagawa Lam, and Zachary Alaka Ilam. Kili is a kumu at the Hawaiian Language Immersion School, Ke Kula o Navahi o Kalani o Pu'u. And Frank is also an educator at the University of Hawaii Manoa's Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge. Kahonuola, Nick, and Zach, as some of you may know, are bandmates in the award-winning group Ke Aho. Kahonuola is also kumualelo Hawaii at Kamehameha School's Kapalama High School. Nick is a doctoral student at UH Hilo's College of Hawaiian Language, Kahakaʻula o Ke Eliko Kolani, and Zach is a doctoral student in political science at UH Manoa. With degrees in Hawaiian Studies, Uilani is a licensed attorney and currently a post-JD Fellow at the William S. Richardson School of Law's Kuhuliau Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. Mahalo nui for taking time out of the middle of your weeks to join us from across the islands. If you want to say hi right now, feel free.
Hi.
Oh yeah, there we go, hey. So we're super excited to hear more and learn more about the beautiful mele that you all have composed. But before I turn things over to Ahukini, just some quick housekeeping. I want to encourage our audience who has tuned in via Zoom to please send in any questions that you have using the Q&A function in the webinar, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And a friendly reminder that this program is being recorded and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel and website to view afterwards. So with that, Ahukini, I'll turn it over to you.
Mahalo nui e Brianna. Ano ai ke velina kako o Ahukini keia aloha. Mahalo nui a oko I kanawe ana mai I keia ahi. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. And again, mahalo to our special guests and Haku Mele this evening. We really look forward to hearing and learning more about the wonderful mele that you've all composed. This is really gonna be a special treat. I'm looking forward to it. No leila, meka emo ole e ho'omaka kako will commence with our first mele tonight. Ahulau ka pi'i ka kanilua, composed by Frank and Kili, is featured on Huliāmahi, Volume 1. This mele commemorates the battle known as Ka Kanilua, or Kamoku Ilima, between Kalaniʻopuʻu, Chief of Hawaii Island, and Kahekili Nui Ahu Manu, Chief of Maui Island. It recounts the history of events that has led the community group Ma'alama Ka Kanilua to engage the courts and administrative agencies over the years to protect Hawaiian burial grounds and cultural sites on Maui. Mahalo.
Ka pi'i ka kanilua I ke po'owahi me kaniula He vai au o ka launeki Kai ehu aku I ka lau o ka ilima Kue ka e aula kue hue ka lepo ka kanilua me ka moku ilima O nā kaua Huliāmahi o ka hekili nui ahu manu Kuai e ka alapa me ka pi'i Pi'i ana e kai ai ka ma'o Ka hiko I ka a'ahulu o ka manu Kena I ka wai a o wailu Kue ka e aula kue hue ka lepo ka kanilua me ka moku ilima O nā kaua Huliāmahi o ka hekili nui ahu manu Ahai ai ka kalani nui kalani hale o olono ana I ka ia kaleo hau o komo e kai ai tamakaha hau a puni kanai aua e hu kue ka e a ula kue hue ka lepo ka kanilua me ka moku I lima o nā kaua Huliāmahi o ka he kili nui ahu manu no ka he kili nui ahu manu kapu e kapu moe I ka vela
He mele keu a ka nahe no ke la. Mahalo, Keely and Frank, for that beautiful composition. If you don't mind to answer just a couple of questions in a short Q&A before we move on to our next mele, please, if that would be all right. What did you two enjoy about composing this mele? Were there any challenges? What were the sort of pros and cons of that, if you don't mind? Mahalo.
Aloha kako. Yeah, I think the most difficult thing about about composing it was understanding that we were trying to tell the story of, in the great scheme of history, we're trying to tell the story of the losing side who won at one point. So this was a really famous battle in its time, and it's Maui's way of saying that they had some things that we have to remember too. When Hawaii Island conquers everybody, Hawaii Island culture and history also conquers most of everyone else's history. And so the difficult part was just always remembering that what we were trying to do was tell Maui's sides of the story. Tell Kahekili Nui Ahumanu's side of the story, because he wins against all odds at this time period. Yeah.
Mahalo nui. We know that both you and Keely are kumu, and so as educators, how do you use mele to inspire and teach younger generations of Kānaka about their history?
Nui kako. First, I'd like to mahalo Brianna and Ahukini for having us this evening, and also like to apologize if you hear lots of kani on this side. We agreed to sit on this panel and didn't think who would be watching our daughters, so they're running rampant in the house right now. So e kala nui mai. But speaking about our daughters, and with Ahukini's nino for teaching younger generation through mele, yes, we definitely do both use mele as a way to teach different teaching strategies. Ay, mahalo. As a teaching strategy for our students, Frank teaches at the university level, and this year I am student teaching at Navahio Kalanio Pu'u with grades 4 through 7. But so I can speak for my classes that when we meet and when we come together outside of class, we make sure to incorporate mele because it helps to teach the students about how they should be conducting themselves when they arrive at class and preparing them mentally. And then also, because just as your question asked, the history within mele, there's ike olelo, there's language knowledge about grammar, pilino olelo, there's cultural knowledge, and all of those different things help to inform the students about who they are and who they come from. So definitely we try to intertwine mele into our teaching for our students as well as our daughters in our home.
Okay.
Mahalo nui ya olua. Thank you folks so much. Brianna?
Yes, mahalo. So the next mele, Kalua Hole, composed by Nick, is also featured on Huliāmahi. In the late 1970s, the Department of Land and Natural Resources first enacted the Fisheries Revitalization Project called the Kapuku Plan. This plan demonstrated that Kānāwai, the shoreline area near Waikiki and Leahi, held a contemporary application of the traditional practice of kapu on fisheries. The decision to limit shoreline uses of this area to non-commercial activities, including surfing, paddling, swimming, and fishing, has ensured that Kānāwai continues to be a venue of recreation and community engagement, and that this historic shoreline is protected.
Aina pili ka hakai I ke kai Maui a o Waikiki Kia I mauna loa kau mai luna I ke ala ana mai ua kai Akai aku I ka kuku ale 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 mai ana Ke poina nalu Nalu iho ka manao I ka āina nei I uka hoʻia Aloha ku'umaka ia luna o ke kaha Umaile ahi ka hano 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 ku'aina e wai honei me ka malulu niu o ka ae kai e ho'i ke aloha I ka lua hole Lua ole konani ka u'i ke hea e nei Ia hoku lani no ho'i ke aloha
Mahalo, Nick, for that beautiful mele. It sounds like a pretty personal song, and also just one very relatable. For me personally, living on Oʻahu, and I'm no pro surfer at all, but when I do go out into the water, it is a breathtaking, stunning view. And so I'm curious why you chose the first person point of view for this mele.
I think the really interesting thing about this song is that whenever I write a song, I want to try to experience that place right before. So I just have personal ties to it. But when I was tasked to write this song, it was actually right when we had the stay-at-home order. So I couldn't legally, technically, go to Kānāwai and really experience it. I've been there before, but not for the purpose of being there and, you know, experiencing the land and the water and seeing what I felt. So the cool thing about this song is that, yes, it is in the first person view, but a lot of it actually came from me trying to remember what I experienced before and using almost like my imagination to imagine myself paddling out in the water and what I would see there, and then when I'm returning to shore, looking at the shoreline and Le'ahi and all these kinds of things.
Beautiful, thank you. And what do you hope listeners will take away from your mele that honor Aina and Wahipana?
I think the most important thing with mele pana and mele that have to do, or that hold place names, is this idea that it documents not only names but the stories behind them too. One of the other songs that I've written before is Aloha Mauna Lua, and I did a lot of research for that song, and one of the place names that I put in that song was Kānāwai, which is the name of what we know now as China Walls. But by knowing that name and bringing back Kānāwai, we can not only understand that name, but understand the mo'olelo that came behind it, which is of Kāna and Kānāloa when they were digging their various pools of fresh water to drink. And from that name, Kānāwai, we can even see that it's a vai that these friends possibly shared together. So I think that's the most important thing about these mele pana, is that it allows us to remember names and also the mo'olelo that are associated with it.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's a lot of power in that, and you're almost like a little researcher essentially in your music composition and writing. So thank you so much for making sure those names and places are carried on to the future. If you want to say something else about the mele, we have 1 more minute. Otherwise, we can just move on to the next, and other questions will be addressed, of course, during the bigger Q&A. All good? Okay, I'll hand it over to you, Ahukini.
Mahalo, Brianna. Okay. Kāwai o Kauaʻula, composed by Kahanuola, is featured on the album Lei Nāhonoapi ilani na Mele Hou. It remembers the victory of the Kauaʻula Valley kalo farmers in 1897, Supreme Court case Horner versus Kumuliʻiliʻi. This mele helps us to recall the various āina and honor the collective stewardship and use of the waters of Piʻilani, Aloha, and Kauaʻula Valley. Mahalo nui e ka hanuala, a mahalo nui au I ka lohi ana I na leo na keiki, ke kahi. Yeah, it was so nice to hear the voices of the children. And here we see on this slide a ki'i of you and the kapu ohana. Ka hanuala, can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with the keiki and this ohana on this mele?
Mahalo, first of all, mahalo for having us. And it was a really good experience. I got to meet this beautiful ohana, Uncle Keomoku, and those are all his grandchildren who were able to join me on this mele. And you know, none of them were actually singers, but they did their best, and they sound amazing. And I think for me, they're the ones that are going to be carrying on the traditions and carrying on these place names. So it was very important to have them in this mele, being that they're kupa of Kauaʻi.
And so in writing Kawai o Kauaʻi, did you gain a new understanding of life in the 1890s?
Yeah, definitely. I guess a little bit more about life at that time in Kauaʻi. There was 22 land districts or 22 land divisions, and they were separated into two sections, 11 āina in one, 11 āina in the other. And then they would actually have to split the time when they had to use the water. So the first 11 would use the water in the morning time for 12 hours, and then the second section would use for the evening time. And just thinking back, or nowadays, we kind of take that for granted. We can go and get vai, or we have access to water whenever we feel like it or wherever we want it. So, you know, it makes me appreciate what we have now, especially our vai. Yeah, as I think back to that time.
Mahalo. And you speak of vai, and it's great importance to Kānaka, both past and present, yeah? And so can you please share your mana'o on the use and symbolism of vai in Mele Hawaii, in Hawaiian music?
Oh, okay. So yeah, well, if you look at the word for rich or valuable, you get, the word is pretty much vai, water, water. But you can see in the mele that our kupuna wrote, how they really held or had a really good connection or pilina with vai. They use words like ho'oheno ika vai or vai kamaha'o, vai kaulana. So you can see that they held this water in highest esteem, and they really had respect and aloha for the waters that they have from their āina. I think other things is that in the mele that were written, we can see like snapshots or how they describe the waters, how they describe the rains, the oceans, and the rivers. You know, we can learn a lot from that, how the water was at that time, how the rain was in a certain area. And then also on the different islands, they talk about, like on Big Island or Hawaii Island, they can talk about Lake Waiau. In Kauaʻi, they talk about Namolokama. So you can see the different ways that the kupa of that place, how they malama their vai, and how the pilina and the relationship they have with the waters of that area.
Indeed. Mahalo nui for your mana'o. Thank you so much.
The last two songs we will hear tonight are featured on the album Huliāmahi. In 2015, led by Maui's 4,000 plus member group Stop Cane Burning, community members filed the first ever environmental court case against Hawaii's Department of Health. The lawsuit challenged the state's approval of sugarcane burning. Aloha Aina, Kapua A'okeko, composed by Zach, retraces the Kingdom-era āina, namely the network of old government roads used in Alexander and Baldwin's operations. After court-ordered mediation, cane burning was restricted in what was its final harvest, clearing a path for justice to follow. Mahalo, Zach. That is such a beautiful mele. And, you know, it's really, it talks about too such a harmful, destructive practice. And were you involved with the stock cane burning group yourself?
I actually wasn't. And, you know, what was so great for at least my experience was that it was a learning of this situation in hindsight. And I think in that case, it allowed me to learn the situation from such a perspective that I guess created a unique perspective to ultimately come to what this mele became to be.
Thank you. And kind of similar, related to what you just said, but maybe expanding more in composing mele in general, especially if you're not involved necessarily or have, you know, you're talking about an older time or something. How does composing mele help you connect to the people and the land that you're singing and writing about?
Oh gosh, we don't have enough time to talk about all of that. But it's a great and it's a packed question, because basically you're asking, how does mele facilitate connections, right? And what's beautiful about that is, like, whether that connection is going to be with a specific place or it's going to be with a specific person or group of people. You know, I always like to say that mele is like this ancestral technology that allows connections that are beyond what we usually see at face value today. In the case of this mele, it actually just talks about a few roads, very important roads. You know, when it comes to the White Coal Road, which is still on Maui, you can pass that. Kala Sunnyside, even Kihimakawao, that's one that I don't believe is in its entirety still intact, but it's there. And you know, in this case, the mele facilitates the connection in that we remember where these places are and thus why they're important. In this case, these roads functioned as the reason why cane burning ultimately stopped. And that's what's beautiful about being able to encapsulate that in any mele. Because now when we sing it, when we listen to it, we can go back and then we can see, oh yeah, that I know that. And for, you know, if I listen to this song long enough, I will memorize it. And then now I have not only memorized the song, but I've memorized this history that is a part, literally ingrained in the place that we are. Well, we're on Maui right now, so this island. So that's what's wonderful about, you know, facilitating connections with Mele, place, people.
That's beautiful. What a powerful answer too. And relatedly Mele, but the Hawaiian language too is in using that in itself is that ancestral tool that you mentioned, that Mele provides. And Hawaiian language, Aloha Hawaii, is such a complex, poetic language and form in itself. So what do you love about composing and singing in Aloha Hawaii that, you know, maybe English doesn't provide?
That's a cool question, and it's a really specific question because you kind of already hit it on the head, where there are certain things that Hawaiian can facilitate that English cannot do as well. Not saying it cannot do it, but it cannot do it as well. We'll look at a word in English and we'll take that at face value, and perhaps we'll take that with inferences, with references, with allusions. The same is true with Hawaiian, but the difference is there's this community consciousness and knowledge and remembering and memory of what certain words or certain phrases mean. And when I invoke that word or that phrase, I'm bringing along all of that meaning. And for the listener, if they are privy to that, all of those meanings, then they get that entire chunk. Yeah, it's like I always like to think it's like a compressed zip file, like how we have zip files today. It's like you get one file, but if you open it and you dig through it, you're gonna see so much more information. And if you're not perhaps privy to that, to all of those references, you still get an enjoyable experience listening to the song. So I think that's what's so unique about Mele, is that you're going to be able to engage in Mele at one level, at multiple levels, at all levels simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Zach. And I'll just take a minute to say mahalo to all of you so far for giving us our, those little zip files, like you mentioned, just packed with that history and that heritage that we're getting to listen to tonight. So I thank you so much again. And we're on to our last song, and I'll pass it over to Ahukini.
At that time already, I wish we had a whole nother. Been such a lovely evening. Our final mele this evening is Aia I Wai Oli Ke Aloha Aina. After devastating flooding in 2018, the Waiʻoli Valley Tarahui discovered that portions of their pre-contact lo'i kalo system were on state conservation land, requiring them to navigate a host of legal and administrative hurdles. Kahuliau Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law, with support from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and the Environmental Law Clinic, helped the Waiʻoli Valley Tarahui navigate the maze of legalities. The result was a partnership between DLNR and the Hui as stewards over the first co-managed terrestrial area. Aia I Wai Oli Ke Aloha Aina, composed by ilani, honors Aloha Aina as a cultural practice and belief embodied through the actions of the Waiʻoli kalo farmers.
Aloha Aina,
Nahe nahe. Wow. Mahalo nui. That was such a beautiful composition, Ui.
You.
Oh, mahalo yaoi. Like that. Okay, so if you could please, yeah, and this song talks about, you know, our love for āina, malama āina, aloha āina. Do you mind to explain this concept, this profound concept of aloha aina and what it means or looks like for you particularly?
Sure. Yeah, sheesh, there are like books and dissertations dedicated to unpacking that term. But I think the short answer, and in the context of our program today, and especially this CD, I think Aloha Aina is about the relationship between Aina and Kānaka, man and land, and how that relationship is maintained and nourished, and in some cases protected. And I think that that Aloha Aina is practiced in a number of ways, in a number of different ways. Fundamentally, like the farmers in Waiʻoli, like they have done for generations. But we also see it with the work that NHLC does. We see it in these mele here, that a few of them that we listened to today here. Oh yeah, there's everyone. And I guess with respect to how I practice it in my life, I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with the awesome team at Kahuliao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law at the law school. So for me personally, it goes back to this CD that's using Hawaii's unique laws to protect and I guess facilitate these relationships and our practices and people.
Okay, and speaking of relationships, how was it working with this group and the Waiʻoli Valley Taro Hui? And do you mind to share a little bit about your experience with them?
Yeah, oh gosh, they're awesome people. I'm so grateful to them for letting me be a part of their work and helping them and just getting to witness the practice that they've been doing for generations. So it was really rewarding. And I actually wrote this when I was a third-year law student in the environmental law clinic. And then I got to go back and help co-teach the class this past spring. So I've been really fortunate to be able to work with them as well as the team at Kahuliao.
Awesome. Oh, mahalo nui. Okay, so before we move into our official Q&A, I'd like to please pose a question to both you and Kili, please, Ui. As women of hula, as hula sisters, and haku mele, how does knowledge in haku mele and hula enhance one another? How does having knowledge is there a way that because one is of course hula, as we know, using motion to explain the story versus haku mele is composition, and so how are there like similarities, or how does one complement the other in a sense?
Sure. I'll take a stab and then Kili, you can chime in. I will say, I mean, again, another loaded question to unpack, but I will say the short answer is that hula needs mele. I think both are expressions, and I think both are ways to transmit knowledge and tools and cultural practices to be able to tap into certain connections and facilitate awareness, pilina, et cetera, with aina, people, events, a whole host of things. So I think they're really unique tools, cultural practices that we get to use in sort of the same way, even though they're different in some ways, they go hand in hand.
Kili, did you have anything to add?
Oh, Kānāwai.
Do you have anything to add?
Oh, yes, I'm just gonna kaka'o what Ui said. Both of us were fortunate to grow up dancing hula from a young age, and that was what that was what both of our cultural foundation was actually in. And because we danced, and because we learned different movements within hula, when both of us were in college and on a track to help us learn more about language, or Olelo Hawaii, then we were able to inform our movements with language. And then coming down, further down the line, here we are composing mele, and using that knowledge from hula and using that knowledge from our language backgrounds to help inform how we portray our thoughts through song, has been extremely, having those two, the hula and the language foundations, has been extremely beneficial to helping us understand not only the mana'o that we put into mele, but also I don't have a music background, but also the beat of mele, whether we want it to be mele that is danced to, what that should sound like, or a mele that's chanted. What is the way that, how we should be, I'm at a loss for words, how we should be composing the lines of the mele to match how we would want it to be performed. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Mahalo nui for your explanation. Definitely. It's a difficult question, totally. And so thank you folks so much for honoring it in such a wonderful way. Thank you for taking that question. Mahalo nui. And so with that, I believe we are now into our official Q&A for this evening. Brianna?
I have a few questions to start us off. And when we get through these, though, I'm going to have to turn my screen share off because Zoom is not letting me open Q&A as I'm sharing my screen. So apologies if you've seen my mouse kind of going all over the place. But for this first question, so some of the mele we've heard tonight, it's pretty clear that they're drawing from the musical styles of the 20th century. And again, all these questions are open to everyone. So what about that sound, the sound of that era, calls to you all, and why was it important to use that sound for the particular mele?
Since nobody's saying anything, Frank, you want to say something? That's a great question, Frank.
I can see some of the questions, and see, this is exactly what we kind of expected, because yeah, it is a war. It is a song. It is a song about war. But again, it's from Maui's side about the war that they won. Yeah. And I think a lot of us, and Zach can also talk a lot more about this, but the connection between lyrics and melody is not very important all the time in Hawaiian music. You have extremely sad songs with absolutely beautiful and happy melodies. And then you have songs about super fond remembrances that you think would be slow and would be just sitting there and reminiscing, but they're super fast and they're up tempo. Our specific song, we actually took, I'm sure most people are familiar with Holewai Mea. And I think if you remember Holewai Mea, you probably remember the melody that Kamehameha schools made super popular. And then in the chorus of Holewai Mea, it's gonna sound a lot like the chorus of Ahulau Kapi'i Kakanilua. If you go even further back in time, before 1877, Prince Leleiohoku does his own melody for Holewai Mea, and it's a waltz. And so that just furthers this idea that the melody is simply the way to get it out. It's not gonna tell you the story. Yeah, the melody is not there to tell you the story. The words are there to tell you the story. in hula, we don't dance to the melody. We don't dance to the instrumentation. We dance to the words. Yeah. And so the connection of lyrics and melody, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. As we come closer and closer to today, where music, for most of us, music is easier to understand than language, because we grew up learning certain kinds of music and hearing certain kinds of music. We grew up knowing what a sad song was, what a happy song was, what an angry song was. And so that, we can't get rid of that. As second language speakers of Hawaiian, music is easier for us to get around. And so we expect a lot more as far as melodies and instrumentation when it comes to Hawaiian music. But always, just like Ui and Kili said, hula does not exist without words. And Hawaiian music doesn't really exist without words either. Even if we think about Slack Key, it's based on a song that has words, and then later on we have instrumentals that have no connection. But melodies are just, that's just to make it fun.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Frank. Zach, did you want to add anything?
Nope, Frank got it all. That was great, Frank. Good job.
Okay, let's see. Another question. Okay, these are more so just comments. Where did the passion to compose and perform music come from? Who were some of your early inspirations?
Okay, I'll go. I think inspirations are the kind of thing where you don't choose them. You don't choose what you like. Something that inspires you, sincerely inspires you. And the reason I bring that up is like, in a way, the music that comes out of the haku mele, or even the words that come out of the haku mele, are not simply just from or of the haku mele. They have at least a little bit of genealogy. It's like, I made the melody like this because I like so-and-so and the way he or she sings or does their music. And I think that's really one of the unique and really important attributes about how mele works, because mele will imply, again, connection. But so to get to your question, for me, my inspirations are, Nina Kelly Iwahamana. As far as vocalists, Robert Casimiro. There are so many. Even on the haku mele side, though, you have Helen Deshay Beamer, Lena Machado, Charles E. King, and to be able to kind of position oneself in that genealogy of I guess, inspiration, that's what continues to push this haku mele practice forward, not only for entertainment. Look at the fact that we're talking about mele and the rule of law and the social intersections of that. There's something beautiful about that, and what we're showing, and not us, like just us, what the practice shows is that it has meaningful and important interfaces with a lot more of our daily life. And the more we utilize those tools, actually, the more we learn those tools first, and then the more we utilize them, we start to grasp things that we didn't know were there. And I think that's eventually we become, again, a part of this genealogy of inspiration that most naturally turns into something that is self-determined, for lack of better terms.
That's really, really beautiful. Does anyone want to add anything? If not, I have a follow-up question to that. Okay, so you kind of touched upon mele and music in general as a not just educational tool, but a almost sort of activist political tool in itself. And so I'm curious what you hope listeners will take away from the two albums featured here tonight, and your other mele.
I guess I'll start first with that, but I think, you know, there are going to be others who have some mana'o on that as well. First of all, I think it's very interesting the way that you characterize, you know, that I guess a political activist type of I guess approach when it comes to Mele, and I want to kind of like put a pin in that simply because it is one thing to blatantly, you know, be on the offense and to say, you know, I don't like this, or I don't like that, or I really like this and I really like that. But it's a different kind of holding, it's a different kind of, I guess, power structure when you just exist for the reasons that you should. And the reason why I say that is these mele, this collection of mele, and in this case, you know, for the album Huliāmahi, yeah, they capture the stories, real stories of people who are still alive today, still watching this as we speak. They went through this experience, and in many ways it was maybe traumatic, maybe extremely cathartic, but at the end of the day, these mele, yes, they have some agency in being able to retell this story. But the true agency from this mele, from any of these mele, comes from either the people who sing them or the people who are going to listen to them as an active participant, right? That's where the magic happens, right? Because this mele, in these cases, I would say, they're sitting there and they have these beautiful stories about real people really recently. And the only way that you get to use this tool is when you pick it up, right? Is when you are able to either sing it, or, you know, you don't have to learn, you don't have to know what it's about. The fact that the words are gonna come out of your mouth as you sing along, perhaps, that existence, that's a statement there, as opposed to, you know, these are how I feel. It's like, actually, no, this is what I do. And because this is what I do, there's you know, there are multiple results from that. Sorry, a little long-winded, but I'm sure others have mana'o on that as well. Jonah or Nick or Ui or Frank or Kili or Unia.
I'd like to add on. So most of us, we don't write mele for ourselves. We write it for people, places, as makana. And, you know, going through this process of writing the mele for Kauaʻi, it was really important to actually meet those people. That was the best source, is to learn from the people, the kupa of that place, being that I'm from Oʻahu. So seeing the place, meeting the people, learning their stories, and taking those accounts from them personally. In order, you know, these mele are going to live on for future generations. The kiki and the kamali'i are mo'opuna to learn. So yeah, I think learning from the actual people and putting that into your mele, that's a really important thing.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add? Keely, I see you. Are you? No? Okay. Ahukini, are there other questions that have come in?
Let's see, via our chat box. If you folks wouldn't mind, maybe to share a little bit about the supporting documents or some of the sources that you folks, because you folks talk about some really important places, and so what sort of physical pala did you folks have to kako'o? You actually get to read through the Horner versus Kumuli'ili'i case, etc. And was that able to support your songwriting process?
I think I can take a stab at this one. I think on the haku mele side of this, the best source you can use is mele itself. And just getting this kind of fluency in your mele, in all these mele that have ever existed, understanding what are the features of a mele pana or a mele aloha or a mele inoa or a mele ho'ohanohano, to understand like the lexical items even of those kind of mele. The greatest source is having this huge catalog of mele in your head that you can pull from and you can relate your own creations to.
Mahalo. Would anyone else get to add or elaborate on that awesome answer? Mahalo nui.
I think it's also really important for us to remember that as Nick said, we have to go back to our different repositories of poetry in Hawaiian. But I think even beyond that, we have to always remember that all of our history didn't exist from what the translated texts tell us. So we have to actually go back. If it's a mele, then it's a mele. If it's a newspaper article, it's a newspaper article. If it's an interview with some really old person who remembers things from their childhood that we'll never experience today, we have to go back to whatever primary source Hawaiian language, or maybe even as close to the Hawaiian language source as we can get, right? If we cannot get to Bill Panui, whose family held a whole lot of Kamehameha stories, we look for Bill Panui's nearest relative who got the stories from him. And so we try and go back to the closest thing that we can to that time period. If it's a mele, if it's literature, if it's a kupuna, whatever it is, we have to remember that even though we are writing songs to commemorate historical events, the history doesn't start with us. Yeah, the history it's always been, language and mele has always been here in Hawaii, and we cannot assume that we're trying to do something that's never been done. All we're trying to do is make sure we don't stop doing it like everybody else did. Yeah.
Mahalo, that was a really beautiful answer. And that takes us right to time. I can't believe this hour is over already. Thank you so much, Keely and Frank, Zach and Ui, Kahonuola and Nick. So much for sharing your mana'o tonight and your beautiful mele. I'm very thankful. I've learned a lot. And I also want to say mahalo to Ahukini for co-hosting with me. I appreciate sharing the spotlight, but if you guys don't have anything else to add, I'm just gonna say aloha and please take care, everyone, and we'll leave it at that.
Mahalo nui ya oko.